We rolling? Okay. So I'm Josh.
I'm Katie.
Welcome to What Matters Most, our lovely podcast where we talk about what matters most. So this week we want to talk about intentional living. Basically, what that looks like, pursuing healthy relationships, not only with God but with other people, and how to set that up. So you have some notes you want to share?
Just initially, intentional living is really being a good steward of what God has given us. Whether it's our time or whether it's our money or, whatever it is, mainly, time. But it's being a good steward, and it's being not self-focused, but God-focused, because everything that we have is from God. And so when we're living intentionally, we are glorifying God through that.
Yeah, that's huge. So what are some ways, the verse that I had for this was Romans 12:1, and it basically talks about our true act of worship is being a living sacrifice. So living sacrificially, being available for God, and in a way inconveniencing ourselves to whatever he calls us to, or the people that he calls us to love, or the things that he calls us to do. It's not always going to involve a hashtag or a tag, or a like, or I'm sharing this, or it's gone viral, or anything like that. A lot of times it's something that nobody else sees, and maybe it's just you and that other person, or maybe it's nobody. Maybe you do something intentional for somebody else that doesn't quite know it yet. I've heard of some people where if they see trash on the floor, they'll pick it up. Well, that's blessing a janitor that won't have to, and you may or may not get seen for that. Sometimes I've heard of people paying off a random person's hospital bill, or sometimes people buy the drink for the car behind them, or but then there's other intentional stuff where you have the relational equity built up to where you intentionally give your friend a call, or you check in, or you feel this pull or cue from the Holy Spirit, or God, or whatever, to give this person a call, and you reach out and you're like, hey, how's it going? Just wanted to check in. Just felt like praying for you today, and they're like, oh man, I'm so glad you called. I was just praying and asking God to send somebody my way, and so we get to engage with that relationally when we are intentional and driven, but also seeing that as a true act of worship, that we're submitting our lives to oftentimes a life of inconvenience. That
and part of intentional living too is part of the I don't know if like big picture is the right word, but in kind of this is not our home, but that doesn't mean that we should just not care about what happens to us, or to we need to be intentional in how we live our life here on earth, and to be glorifying to God. And the kind of the other side of that, when it's not like the relational side, is kind of in like stewarding and not being a lazy person, and kind of like having almost like a goal in mind for your life, because if your goal is just like, well, I want to like make the most money I can, like that's not I mean that is kind of being intentional with your life, but not for the right reasons, I guess. But if you're if you're being careful in how you're following God, and one thing that when I was thinking about this topic is like Christians should, like, we know Christians should live way different lives than non-Christians, because we have God in our life, and part of that is just morally we live way differently. But the other part is how like we should be living every day as unto the Lord, and we should look at things differently, right? We should have different, we shouldn't just be all, I want to get a job just because I want to make like the most money as possible, or something like that. You want to set yourself up, but also just like we're not doing it for ourselves, but we're doing it for God, and our lives should just look radically different from non-Christians. And one of the verses I looked up was Colossians 3:23, which says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men.
Yeah.
And just that, I feel like that puts that in such a good perspective of intentional living, in a sense of intentionally living for God.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you look at it that way, it's like, okay, who's your boss in that moment? Who's the one calling the shots?
What matters most for that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And several weeks ago, we talked about, the will of God and what that looks like. And essentially, what does God desire in the situation? And if we're fully submitting ourselves to what God wills in the situation, there's going to be times where it's inconvenient, or times where it costs us something monetarily, or our time, or our energy, or our resources. And if we're doing it for God, like all of a sudden the motivation behind that gets that much more pure, to where it's not to get an accolade, or it's not to get even a thank you, or some sort of promotion. It's, I'm doing this because God willed it.
Yeah.
God desires me to show love in this area. God desires for me to forgive. God desires for me to,
and that changes your life so much, and it changes what you do and how you act towards people. And that's definitely something that I've learned, especially through like the last 2 or 3 years. And just like, it's just the way that you treat others, thinking about like, okay, like we all know, we need to treat others like we want to be treated. And we see that through how Jesus treated people. But part of it's like, but then, as a Christian, that's also like, it's not just like, I want you to treat me this way. It's also, you almost have to be like the bigger man in a lot of situations.
Or woman. Right?
No. Like, turning the cheek and stuff like that. It's like, okay, if you proclaim to be a Christian, you should be living differently than those around you. And you should be, and that is following the Bible and following God. And that's really important because it's bearing fruit too.
Yeah. Yep. And I think there's a place for being spontaneous. I think there's a place for God being able to interrupt your schedule or whatever. But one of the things I'm trying to tackle and encourage us as listeners and everything else to be more proactive about is being intentional. So there's lots of things that we know. Like anybody that, and this is the thing that's been actually really encouraging to me. So I'll talk about how it's benefited my own life, and then kind of encourage you guys to do the same. But so as I've allowed other people to know me and get to know me more, and been transparent and real and everything like that, there's certain things that kind of bubble up to the top of that. First off, where do I like to drink coffee at? Dutch Bros, right? So, what's my favorite fast food restaurant?
Chick-fil-A.
Right?
Or In-N-Out.
Yeah, or In-N-Out, whichever's closer. No. But those are just too little in the eternal scheme of things. They don't matter at all. But they're two very little preference things that, as people know me, they can be intentional about.
They can bless you.
Exactly. They're like, hey, you want some Dutch Bros? I didn't ask for it. I didn't put it out there.
Josh just did that to me today. Yeah. He's like, hey, do you want some Dutch Bros?
Exactly.
I was like, yes, I love Dutch Bros.
But it's little acts like that where you get to know somebody, you get to know what they like, and even if it seems really shallow on the surface, you offering that shows that you know them, right? If somebody hated Dutch Brothers, which I don't know of anybody that does, except for maybe Danny doesn't hate Dutch Brothers. He loves Dutch Brothers. He just doesn't drink it very often, but he doesn't like spending that much money, right? But if you know somebody didn't like something and then you offer it, it's like, okay, one of the embarrassing things about that is that, you don't know that person very well. Like, anybody that knows me knows I don't like ... And so it's a way that we can show the love of God in a very intentional way when we take the time to get to know people and to be intentional about that kind of stuff, because it does bless people. Yeah. When you get somebody something for their birthday or for a holiday, or like we were just talking about, like for graduation or whatever, when people show up and they're intentional and they bless you like that, that means something. Yeah. And again, there's something to be said for the friend that just swings by. Oh, it's just in the neighborhood. Thought I'd swing by and say hi and everything like that. That's great. I mean, that's always nice. But even with what we did the last couple of days with, there's a group from the church that are meeting and camping
Yeah.
and everything like that. We intentionally drove out to see them, to visit
Yeah.
them.
Yep.
Like it took half hour, 45 minutes to get out there. We didn't just accidentally show up there. It was intentional.
Yeah.
And you can see how that blesses people, because it's like, oh, you took time out of your day to come and see
Yeah.
me, not for anything other than to just say hi and see how I'm doing.
Yeah.
So going and being intentional. I think there's so many stories throughout Jesus's life that I mean, I would argue everything he did was intentional.
Yeah.
To
I'd
the
agree
point
with
where,
that.
I mean, it says Jesus didn't do anything the Father didn't tell him to do.
Yeah.
So,
Talking to the woman at the well.
yeah,
That
and
was
it could have
intentional.
been-
It wasn't just,
yeah.
oh, hey, look, you're here. Let's
exactly.
talk.
Yep. It could have been minute to minute,
Yeah.
but Jesus didn't go anywhere
Yeah.
unless the Father told him to. And so any action that he took, it was intentional.
Or even you think of like the story of Lazarus.
Mhm.
He intentionally
Waited.
didn't. Yeah, he didn't go right away.
Yep.
He waited, and he says in that verse that why he waited was because so that they would believe.
Yep.
And just like how even that, which is something that looks, it's like, Jesus, like, why didn't you go? Like, this was one of your best friends who just died, and you're not going to his funeral or whatever it is. And but it was super intentional.
Yeah.
And yeah, just how great and part of that for us as followers of Jesus is not, you can't just claim everything's like, oh well, God wanted me to do this.
Yeah.
Because some things it's like, okay, you really have to be careful with being intentional, right?
Yes.
Because you don't want to just do anything and be like, oh, God wanted me to do that, or God willed me to do that. It's like, if you're sinning, like, God does not want you to sin.
Yeah.
Right? But he can use that, but that's not his,
Yeah.
go-to plan for your life.
But it is a little bit of a stretch to say, if somebody were to say, the opposite, like, well, God told me to get you a Dutch Brothers.
Did he?
Did he though? Like that's a nice thought, but we're called to love each other. We're called to show kindness and be
God can
compassionate.
put things on our hearts.
Absolutely.
But it's not like God was like, Josh, get Katie a smoothie at Dutch Bros.
Yeah. Ask her what kind. Or, no, you tell her what kind you're getting. It's like, no, okay, that's not how that works.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of times where God will call us to situations. He'll call us to messes. He'll call us to places that people are really, really hurting. And we have to be intentional about it. We have to be intentional about showing up. We have to be intentional about being there, being present, and being available. And I think that means so much. And again, going back to this, all throughout Jesus' life here on earth, we can see and point to every single instance that he was there and present with whoever, however big of a group, whether it was thousands or two or even one person. He was totally engaged, totally present, and did it on purpose.
Yeah.
And that's part of what, for a lot of the people, especially the people that were really down and out and cast out of society, they felt that even more of like, I don't deserve this. Like, do you realize who you're talking to? And Jesus is like, yeah, I know. And I think when we have that kind of I don't know, like aggressive faith, where we trust God so much, we're leaning into God so much that when he says go, we go. When he says stop, we stop. When he says let it go, we let it go. Basically whatever he says goes.
Yeah.
And when we use the Bible as a filter and as a guidebook, as a truth resource, where we're like, okay, does this line up with Scripture, or am I just did I have some bad pizza or whatever? Or did I just drink Starbucks? I don't know. Like, it's one of those things where, there's such a blessing, not only for us, because I do believe that when we are intentional like that and we represent God accurately, we get a blessing of joy, and there's some peace on that as well.
Yeah.
But we also get to give that away to people by intentionally showing up, intentionally being present, intentionally being part of their lives, and not accidentally swinging by, or as a matter of convenience, or I had some extra money, here you go. Like, sometimes that stuff works. I'm not discounting that stuff completely. I'm just saying that.
But there's a difference when somebody goes out of their way to bless you, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can see it, and it's not always a big deal, but it's like, you can definitely tell the difference of like,
Yeah.
oh, they like really wanted to bless me
Mhm.
and they really went out of their way and just to love on me
Yeah.
or whatever it
Yep.
is.
And for me, honestly, I've seen it a lot, and because I don't know if I'd necessarily say like my primary love language is like gifts or whatever or anything, but I definitely enjoy receiving a thoughtful gift. And I've definitely received some odd ones over the years where it's like painfully obvious that like, oh, you don't know me at all. Like, and sometimes it's with family functions and that kind of stuff. You haven't seen somebody for a long time and they're just like, well, I'll get them this. And you're like, oh, thanks.
I'm allergic to that.
Exactly. It's a cat. No. But one of the most thoughtful gifts I've received in a really long time, and it's kind of telling well, anyways, we know the person. So,
okay.
But I got this gift for my birthday, and it was like a really, really cool handcrafted guitar strap with buffaloes on it. And I'm like, whoa, like it blessed me a ton because it's not only something that I use all the time, like at least 2 or 3 times a week, but it was also super thoughtful because it was like, I was nicely made. It had cool leather, had the, buffalo print on it, everything like that. And it was like, okay, the biggest part of that blessed me wasn't the guitar strap. It was the thought that went into it to where it's like, okay.
And that's where it comes in, like, it's the thought that counts. And
Exactly.
usually we use that of like, like you tried this and it's the thought that counts.
Yeah.
But honestly, it is the heart behind your actions.
Yes.
And that really comes into intentional living where it's it's really just the heart behind whatever you're doing and how you're acting.
Yes.
And that should be motivated by God. And so that should be, the heart behind how we act, how we talk to others, how we love on others, like all that.
Yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, or?
No.
Okay. Yeah. So bottom line is, our encouragement to you guys is, don't take for granted the things in your life that you have access to, the people that the resources that you have. Be intentional about those things. Be intentional about stewarding those things well, and being creative, being loving, taking risks even with that, because I get that, some of this stuff, it can be risky because you could put yourself out there. You could be like, hey, I was just checking in, seeing how you're doing. Oh, thanks, whatever. They could shut you down, but at the risk of looking like a fool, or at the risk of, being misunderstood or whatever, like, still choose to love, still choose to put yourself out there, still choose to, especially if God is like prompting you to do it. Because I think that will start rebuilding, hopefully, our reputation as believers too, to where the first thing I want to be known for is how we love not only each other, but other people. Yeah. And that starts with being intentional. That starts with not accidentally being nice to somebody, but being very intentional, being very direct, and being very thoughtful about what we do, how we do it, when we do it, all that kind of stuff.
And it's not about us. It is about God. And that's how we're able to be how we are.
Yeah. If you're wanting to showboat and be like, look what I did, it's like, okay, you're doing it for the wrong motive then, and you got to check your motives at the door.
Your right hand,
exactly.
That Bible verse goes.
Yep.
But
All right. So we love you guys. Have a great week. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.